Now it's time to make some cake stands. Here we go. Hi, it's a new day in the studio and I am about to trim the piece that is the foot of the cake stand. I can give you a little bit of a closer look here. Because as you can see, it's just a cylinder because it does not need a bottom because it's going to be attached to the plate that's going to be on top of it. But here's just a little bit too much clay, so I will just trim away some clay from the inside here. I could have also cut it away while throwing, but I felt like the shape was very fragile and the clay was very thin. So I was afraid that it would collapse if I trimmed that away while throwing. So I just prefer to do that the next day because then I can just make it as thin as I want and it is strong enough to hold the shape. So I just placed that on top of my giving grip and now I will start trimming it. I want to do more trimming today because I still have the plates that need to be trimmed and I also want to trim the top part of the cake stand. But unfortunately both of those things are still too wet and the plates have not even come off the bed yet. So that is not great, so I will have to wait a bit longer for that. But I hope everything will be fine. It's just a bit cold, so at night it doesn't really dry that fast. So yeah, for today I am just going to trim this one because this one in some weird way did dry quite quickly. And I will also be throwing some more pieces because I have not thrown everything that I wanted to yet. Okay, voila. It is time to start working on the next piece, which is going to be a sugar jar. I first didn't even think about making a sugar jar, but I was talking to a friend about the high tea party and about things that I were making. And she told me that I should also make a sugar jar, and I totally agree. So that's what I'm going to do now, but it's going to be a little bit of a challenge because, well, first of all, I'm not a really big fan of making pots with lids. I mean, I do like making pots, but I'm not really a fan of making lids. But that's the only reason why I don't like it is because I hate it when the lid does not fit perfectly. It's quite hard to make the lid fit perfectly, but to make that a little bit easier, I've decided to just make the lid by throwing the pot in one piece. So a closed form, and then I will later on cut it open and then I have like the pot with the lid on top of it. I actually made a full instruction video about that, so if you want to know how exactly I do that, I would definitely check out that video. I will link it down below in the description. With this one it's also going to be a little challenge because I need to make sure that a sugar spoon fits into it. I'm not sure if you call it a sugar spoon, but we have this spoon. So this spoon is specially made for sugar. It's basically just a little spoon, but it's like a little bit more of a scoop than a spoon, maybe. That's why it's a sugar spoon, I guess. I don't know, I didn't know that. So I'm just going to try to make a pot in which this spoon fits. And then the top part should stick out of the pot. So I will make a little hole on the side of the pot. And I will just make that hole at the part where the lid and the pot itself like come together. It's going to be a bit of a challenge to make it in the right size so that it sticks out. And I just need to figure out if I want to make it a little bit of a taller and thinner pot or a wider and lower pot. But I think if the pot's a little bit lower, it's easier to scoop out the sugar, because otherwise you can't really scoop, if that makes sense. So I'm going to make a flat sugar jar and I hope it will fit. And I might make two because the table is quite big. So that is what I'm going to try now. So it's time to wedge some clay again. I'm going for 700 grams of clay because that's quite much for a little pot, but when I throw a closed form I always end up needing more clay than I think. So I prefer to just have a bit too much clay, and if it is actually too much I can just cut off some clay from the top after closing the form, but I don't think that will be necessary. And then it's time to start throwing. So first I attach the clay to the wheel and then I start centering it. I do this by coning up the clay and then I press it down again. And I repeat this multiple times until the clay is fully centered. And then I start opening up the clay. I do this by pressing my middle finger into the middle of the clay and I press downwards. And then I pull the clay outwards just like this. And then I start pulling up the walls. I hold the sponge in my right hand and I press towards my left hand on the inside while making an upwards movement. And I also repeat this multiple times so that the walls become thinner and also higher. And while doing this I try to not make it too wide at the top because eventually we will be closing the shape, so it will be a little bit harder to do so if the top part becomes too wide. So when it becomes a little bit too wide I like to hold both my hands around it and press the clay slowly towards the middle. And just like this I go over it a few times to make it higher until the clay is nice and thin everywhere, and then I start closing the shape. I close the shape by holding my hands around it and slowly moving towards the middle at the top. Before closing the shape I get rid of any water or slip that's on the inside because you will not be able to take this out later on, and then I slowly start to close the form. At this point you kind of have to trust the process because as you can see the shape does not look that great, but eventually it will have a nice shape. We'll just first have to close it. So I slowly press the clay at the top towards the middle, and as you can see it becomes a little bit uneven. This almost always happens because it's quite hard to keep everything centered when you're making it so small at the top. But this isn't really a problem, you can just cut this off at a certain point whenever it's bothering you. And then I completely close it by just pressing the clay towards itself at the top here. And I like to keep a little bit of extra clay here at the top, just a little ball of clay at the top to hold the lid, just like a little handle for the lid. I don't know what that's called, but I just like to keep that on here while throwing this so that I don't have to make that later on or anything. And you can of course make it in any shape you'd like. Here I made it a little bit pointy at the top, but with the next one you can see that I made a different shape. And you can just play with this and make whatever you'd like. And then you can define the shape a little bit more, but I was already quite happy with the shape that it had. So I just went over it with a sponge to get rid of any water or slip that was on it. And then I cut away some extra clay at the bottom with a wooden knife. And I also cleaned my bed with this. And then I went over the bottom part of the jar to get rid of any lines that were created by the wooden knife. And then the piece already finished. I forgot to record it with this one, but what I always do is make a little hole at the bottom so that the air has a way out and the piece won't crack while drying. And you can see that with the next sugar jar that I made. I will just quickly show you this one because it works exactly the same as the previous one. This one just has a little bit of a different shape. Hello, we're in the wedge corner again because it is time to move on to the next project because the sugar pots are now drying and then they of course have to be trimmed and I have to turn them in actual pots with lids. But right now I'm going to throw some balls because I was thinking that I also want to include some fruit on the table because like everything is very sweet and there's like a lot of sugar in basically everything. So I thought it would be nice to have a fresh bite in between, and I thought why not just some fruit. So I think I'm going to make 6 balls that I'm going to make in different sizes, and then I can just put like 3 balls together as 2 sets on the table. I think that will look nice. So I'm just going to throw some basic balls. They don't need to be the same size. So I'm just going to cut some random pieces of clay and then use those. I'm not really going to measure it or anything. Today we're going to do a lot of trimming.